YouTube. Yes, let's see once that YouTube stream pulls up. Are we live? Good. We're live over on YouTube also. So welcome to Mindful Live 23. We're talking about the firearm furor inside of our police service. There has been an investigation into the issuance of firearm users licenses in our police service, and the investigation seems to have been a bit focused on the former commissioner, Double G himself, but I found the investigation actually tells a lot more than just about that former commissioner. I think that investigation gives a lot more information than just bad information on the former commissioner. And I think the bad information on the former commissioner part is actually some of the worst parts of this entire probe. Personally, that's my personal opinion. This probe was done by a former Justice Stanley John, and he was hired by the government to do a probe into this. Let's get into what this story says here. Welcome again to Mindful Live number 23. If you are in the lives, make sure to hit that like button. Make sure the algorithm and all of those know that you're in on the live. If you're over on YouTube, you could leave a comment also. You could leave a comment regardless of which live you're in. The comments also help the lives to go out there further, and they increase the user interaction, allowing it to reach out there further. So yes, it's Monday the 24th, and we're talking firearms over here. Bribes paid for gun licenses. An article from the Daily Express. The Stanley John report has detailed interviews with several police officers who spoke of rampant corruption in the firearms permit section of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. As part of his investigation into the issuing of firearm users licenses, retired Justice of Appeal Stanley John conducted in-person interviews with officers attached to the firearms permit section. In his report, John, who was appointed to inquire into the allegations of corruption into the issuance of firearm user licenses by the then Bliss C. Prasad-led Police Service Commission. Okay, so let's get into some history there to see exactly what we're talking about and make sure that we're keeping up with what is established already. So some of the history there. The former Mr. Author Malcolm over on Instagram say he come real late. You're not real late, Author Malcolm. You just late-ish. Nathan, your timing rubbing off on me. I will not have you. If you are late, that's all on you. It has nothing to do with me. Anyway, the history of that is the former commissioner got into a bit of hot water because they were saying that he was allowing too many people to get Goodnight Richard Glubman. They said the former commissioner was allowing too many people just to get their firearm user licenses, and they had a real problem with this. So several investigations were being launched. I found this interesting that this was the angle so many people seemed like they were heading at the former commissioner in. Now, here are some of the questions I had with this. Was there some evidence that licensed firearms were all of a sudden being used in many new crimes? What was the reason for this heightened investigation? Now, the former commissioner keeps pointing out that he's sure this is political. And to me, some of the timing of all of this, good night, Shiny Dogla, some of the timing of all of this kind of seems suspicious to me too. It leans toward the side of it seeming a bit political, because we knew that there was a lot of corruption in the police service. We knew a lot of different areas in the entirety of our society require some of these special investigations. Go investigate the licensing department. So what was the need for the firearm users licenses investigation? It seemed to me like it was a pinpoint, I don't know if to use the word attack, but a pinpoint critique on the former commissioner, and they wanted to get that information out there. The former commissioner had this area that he was lacking in, apparently. So they had an investigation done by two former national security members, and that yielded some results. And then on top of that investigation, they sent that investigation over to the former Police Service Commission, and the former Police Service Commission launched their own investigation where they hired the former Justice Stanley John to launch this investigation, and he has finally come back with the results of this investigation. He expressed the view that in an organization where discipline and integrity are the hallmarks, it was of extreme gravity that this thriving, well-oiled, white-collar criminal enterprise existed. According to the report, which was submitted to the new Police Service Commission last December, 2 known firearm dealers were given access to pending firearm user licenses applications, and a former TTPS employee functioned as a conduit between the firearms permit section and a senior police officer. Several officers attached to the firearms permit section said they were unclear about what the employee's job portfolio was, so they got into some of these interviews. Good night, Nate. Good night, SK Nate. What's up to you too? They got into some of these interviews over there. Delving deeper, this is a senior officer that was attached to the firearm permit section. He delved deeper. He learned that an applicant would go to a dealer and the dealer charged what is called a processing fee, in that the dealer would assist in gathering all the necessary documents required for processing the application. Now, this first part of the seeming corruption in this whole access to the firearms user licenses was that the dealers were doing the registration process. Now, personally, I don't know how bad I look at this. That the dealers, you go to a firearm dealer and you ask them what's the process, they charge you a fee, and they go through the process of registering with you. Now, personally, in that little bit alone, I don't have much of a problem with it, because having registered for many different things, especially when you're dealing with government services, the registration processes are often extremely complicated, sometimes long, sometimes overbearing, sometimes very confusing. So someone charging a fee to go through with you in the firearms registration process, I don't have much of a problem with that personally, at least not yet, from what they have said so far. Consequently, the senior officer said he started to implement measures of his own, whereby he looked at the volume of applications coming in, identified the particular dealer, and looked closely at the trends. So this senior officer found that there was a large volume of applications coming in for firearm user licenses, and he went to see where the highest volume was coming in and tried to look at the trends. Now, personally, I don't have a problem with a large volume of firearm user licenses coming in. If every 1.4, well, it can't be 1.4 million people because there are children in there, obviously, but if all members of the Trinidad and Tobago public who are okay in the law for owning a firearm all apply for a license, there's nothing wrong with that. That is the process. Having a large volume of license applications in and of itself isn't a critique of the process. Nothing is wrong with that. And especially as a police officer, if you are seeing that crime is spiraling seemingly out of control in the country, violent crime is spiking up, then you can't blame many citizens for trying to find access to a firearm. And if they're trying to find legal access to that firearm, better yet. So the large volume in and of itself wasn't a problem. It's what happens in the processing of this large volume. The following excerpts are first-hand. Let me see, something further than that. The following excerpts are first-hand signed accounts given to John. Well, this is what we're speaking about all here still. One of the things that stood out was that some of the applications via those 2 dealers were accompanied by a statement from the applicant's spouse. The requirement that a spouse gives a letter of approval is part of the inquiry process, and the investigator is required to meet with the spouse and record a statement from him or her. The senior officer said he changed the practice and returned such files to the investigator to obtain a full statement from the spouse. I read this and I was confused personally. I'm not sure what exactly was the problem in this particularly. I honestly don't know. They were supposed to get a statement from the spouse. It seems like this senior officer found that the statements they were getting from the spouse were too simple, so he sent back those applications to get a full statement from the spouse. Okay? I think, though, if you're personally getting involved to make the process more difficult without a legal reason, then you're denying someone what should be a legal right in the process. So probably you interfering with the process may be due for more criticism than the process as of until now. We will be living like we in a Western movie, cowboy style, but if most come from a particular source, right? If most come from a particular source, that may be a cause for suspicion. But again, most coming from a particular source in and of itself must have a reason why that is a bad thing. What exactly is the legal reason why they can't do that? One of the things that stood out was that some of the applications were right. He also received information that certain officers were requesting money to fast-track applications, and he reported this to a manager. Now you see this. He also received information that certain officers were requesting money to fast-track applications, and he reported this to a manager. If this was happening, then the problem wasn't with the process. The problem wasn't with the firearm dealers sending in many applications. The problem was with your fellow officers taking bribes and making it seem like citizens living in a country where the murder rate is spiking and violent crime is on the rise, and it seems like every criminal has a firearm. The only people in Trinidad who do not have a firearm are the law-abiding citizens. They are the only ones. So it's no surprise that the firearm applications are increasing in a country like that. As someone says, it's easier to buy a firearm illegally in Trinidad and Tobago. I fully believe that. It's easier, and it might even be cheaper in some cases. So the processes and those little strange things he found in the process, those weren't the real big suspicious parts, and making it seem like when you read the headline, so many parts in the headline made it seem like something from the former commissioner was the real problem. But as of now, nothing here has to do with the former commissioner. Now, many of these cases, I find myself on the side seemingly defending the former commissioner, and personally, I have a lot of problems with the attitude he had too. But I do find that there seems to be a concerted effort to malign him even worse than he is due for. If he is due for some bad words and he has done some negative things, well, do so in a manner that lines up with what he had done. But it seems like some of the criticisms and some of the critiques are coming from some people who had a problem not with his demeanor, but with his job. And they seem to prefer the police service to function in a different direction. And in that case, my problem was with the guy talking too much. But if you're looking to have your police service function in your nice old boys club mentality and in that kind of vein, then I have a problem with that. And as it seems so far, this whole ordeal so far has nothing to do with the former commissioner as of yet. That has to do with the process and people seemingly applying more, and then officers taking bribes. And I would like, you see, with something like this, a former justice did this whole study. I would like to see the trail of officers, because he also received information that certain officers were requesting money to fast-track applications and reported this to a manager. So who were those officers? If we have a police officer, a senior police officer by these accounts, saying of his own accord, and his name was signed to these statements. So I guess this could be a witness statement by and large. His name is signed to a statement saying certain police officers took bribes to fast-track firearms user licenses. I'd like to see arrests made. And if you aren't arresting the officers who took those bribes, then to come and try and throw this headline out there, to try and muddy the waters, to point the finger back at the former commissioner like, look what he had done, we got rid of him with good excuse, that isn't really making me feel any better, because the officers who took the bribes for those firearm users licenses, those FULs, I'm getting tired of saying those three words together, the FULs, the officers that took those bribes are still in the police service. Yes, good old Double G is sitting at home and arguing with people online, but the officers that took those bribes way back then are still somewhere in the police service, apparently, very likely, taking some bribes still. By the way, too much human traffic. The senior officer was asked by John whether he had raised this with the former commissioner, and he admitted to a meeting once, but the meeting was not completed. He said he asked the commissioner for another meeting to go into several aspects of the firearms permit section, but the meeting never took place. Approximately 200 to 300 files were sent to the commissioner for approval on a weekly basis, he said. The senior officer said he made a recommendation for the transfer of a named police officer out of the firearms permit section, and the message did reach the section that the officer be transferred. However, 2 days later, the transfer was rescinded. He communicated with Human Resources only to be told instructions were given by a senior officer to rescind it. Again, this paragraph, again, there are supposed to be some arrests made from this paragraph. A senior officer is saying he made recommendations to transfer a named officer out of the firearms permit section. Why did he make that recommendation? I would assume he made that recommendation because he saw some kind of corrupt activity coming out of that named officer. And if it's a named officer, that means named, in case anyone in the chat doesn't know, named means the identity of this officer is known. So if the identity is known and a senior other officer is accusing him of misbehavior inside of the firearms permit section, the section of our police service that allows people to have guns, and we are a country plagued by gun crime. So if a named officer was supposed to be transferred out because of misbehavior, I don't want him transferred out into another section. I want him charged. Why is that so difficult? If you were named in a police investigation as trying to get your hands illegally or trying to transfer illegally a firearm to someone else, you would be in jail already. You would be sitting in remand yard all now. But no, I know it was not a police investigation and cannot be used for arrest. That's exactly my point. And that's the suspicious thing. Why would you release all of this information where clearly that there are arrestable offenses inside there, and you release all the information without making the arrest just to let us know that there was so much arrestable incidences that happened under the former commissioner? Hate the former commissioner, but don't worry about arresting the evidently corrupt criminal police officers inside of our police service. That does not make sense. I don't care to read this without the arrests being made. And why pay for this if you cannot get something final done out of it? What's the sense? Who released the info? Don't worry, we'll get to that question just now. That's a very curious question. The firearms permit section was also plagued with a lot of traffic, with police officers not assigned to the section frequenting the offices to inquire about the status of applications for third parties, the senior police officer said. He said he put a stop to activity and asked for CCTV for the section. Thereafter, he heard talk that he was going to be transferred because he was interfering with people's business. Around the third week in February, he received a call from a former DCP requesting that he visit the DCP's office. Accordingly, he visited the office where he was served with a letter of transfer from the firearms permit section to the police complaint section. No explanation was proffered for the transfer, he said. Interesting. So, who was this DCP? We have a senior officer who seems to be saying that he had intention to clean up this firearms permit section. he is naming names apparently. He knew that this particular officer shouldn't have been in this section. He wanted that officer transferred. Some senior officer rescinded the transfer. So here it is. Who is the named officer that he wanted transferred out? Who was the senior officer that rescinded the transfer? Who was the DCP that called him into their office and then transferred him out of the firearms section? Who was that DCP? And now, while this whole investigation, this whole matter is being released, and we're being told that who we should really be watching with furrowed brows, blessed night all, blessed night to you too, Skit. So, who we should really be watching with furrowed brows here and with real levels of suspicion, we should be watching the former Commissioner Gary Griffith. You know, he is the one at real suspicion here. But there's still that DCP, whoever that was, he is still there. The senior officer inside of the firearms permit section that needed to be transferred out, he is still there. The officers taking the bribes, they're still there. But Gary is not. And you're telling me Gary is the one I should be watching with great suspicion. But I'll behave yourself. Make $20,000 a week. A constable who served in the firearms permit section from November 26, 2020 to July 23, 2021 explained the process for applications. He said after the FUL files were processed and returned to the firearms permit section from the division, they were placed in the vault and were later taken out either upon request by a civilian attached to the commissioner's office or at the behest of a first division officer. He related an incident during his tenure at the firearms permit section where a member of the TNT Defense Force applied for an FUL. The applicant visited the firearms permit section to inquire the status of the application and spoke to a CSR attached to the unit who informed the applicant that it was still being processed. The constable said he subsequently received a telephone call from the applicant who told him that an officer in the firearms permit section, name given, suggested that an application for a firearms user's certificate be made on his FUL and requested $30,000 for doing so. So, again, an officer in the firearms permit section, name given, suggested that this soldier, we're missed so much while we're talking about the bacchanal inside of the firearms section inside of the police service. Lots of bacchanal. If you missed it, as usual, the videos are there on my YouTube channel, Nathan Springer over on YouTube. Go subscribe, of course, and you could take in all of the previous lives. They're all there, the previous lives, Nathan Springer on YouTube. Go subscribe and you can see them there if you missed any of it. And the lives are there every night for you to go see. And also you have the benefit of seeing the articles actually scroll behind me, and you could follow and read along on the YouTube channel. So there's that. And this Mindful Live number 23 was brought to you compliments of Mindful clothing with Mindful hat and Mindful t-shirts. And be sure to order yours today. Inbox Nathan Springer on either Instagram or any one of the social media sites and order yours today. All right. Going back there, so an officer who requested a $30,000 bribe from a soldier is still there in the firearm users section. Why is he still there? 30,000, obvious. A police officer named the man, and he's still there. But double G is the problem. Remember, double G is the real problem. And one of the ways you could see that this has a real political slant, just look at the people quoting certain parts of these releases for their benefit. Look at the social media activists that are running along with this real seriously. All right. He related an incident, and we heard about that on another occasion. The constable received a call from a named applicant who told him that an officer in the firearms permit section had requested $35,000 to assist him in obtaining a firearm. Again, named people. Where are the arrests? The constable said he raised the matter with the named officer who became extremely abusive and used expletives to him in the presence of a first division officer who remained silent. So, there's a constable out there who is naming the senior officer who cussed him up. Now, we spoke about police cussing the other day. So, police cussing people is no surprise. Police cussing other people, other police, is also no surprise. And this constable is saying that he raised the matter of bribery inside of the firearm users section to a senior officer. The senior officer cussed him up in the presence of a first division officer, and the first division officer said nothing. So again, we have senior officer, bribe taking officer, first division officer who said nothing in the presence. And again, no arrests. But remember, Gary is the bad guy here. And all these guys, remember, anytime you see police officer in all of these investigations, in all of these statements coming out, anytime you see something about senior officer, police officer, DCP, senior acting this, senior acting that, commissioner here, acting commissioner here, all of those police officers, unless they're retired, are still inside of our Trinidad and Tobago police service. Remember that. Keep that in mind. On yet another occasion, the constable said he was approached by an inspector of police, name given, who told him that he can cause him to make $20,000 per week in relation to the issuance of firearms if he were interested. The conversation took place in the presence of a third person, name given. So, again, another inspector, some other third person, we don't know, very likely that may be another officer, and both of them, names given, still in our police service. Keep that in mind. All firearms not surrendered. Now, this is going back into the processing of it, and what they were saying is that the process changed in such a way that if you got a license for another firearm, you were supposed to return the old one, and they stopped doing that. So now some people were collecting multiple firearms. An ASP who was assigned to the section on February 19th in 2021 said he is aware that the firearm dealers bringing applications directly to the firearms permit section where they are processed. Because when I first met the commissioner, he said dealers can make requests for clients. The ASP indicated that during this early tenure in the firearms permit section, when variations were granted, applicants were required to surrender older firearms, but that practice no longer obtains, with the result that an FUL holder can be in possession of several firearms. And the retired inspector of police, in his interview with John, made reference to a file in the name of an applicant with initials GK, which was given by a first division officer to an investigator. He said the file was brought by a well-known firearm dealer. The file was handed to an officer on August 16th with instructions to complete and return on August 17th. The firearm dealers frequented the firearms permit section, especially on Thursdays and Fridays when approval letters were being prepared for forwarding to the commissioner for signature. The dealer had access to different areas of the firearms permit section. The inspector said he brought it to the attention of another officer who said, "Mr. Name Removed, that is bigger than me, you, and even name removed." In another instance, an application by a businessman with initials BY for an FUL was filed on February with no certificate of character attached. The applicant was refused an FUL in 2001. The new application was recommended by the wife of a known firearm dealer. The retired inspector said he interviewed the applicant and subsequently received a call from the dealer informing him there was no need for a certificate of character. The following day, according to the former inspector, he was summoned to the office of a first division officer where the known firearm dealer was present. In the presence of the dealer, the first division officer instructed him to return the file to him the next day. So, again, first division officer named, who had a senior firearm dealer there in his office, orchestrating to a junior officer that you have to process this form and return it. Now, again, I don't see this as a main indictment on the former commissioner. This is an indictment on the police service in and of itself. these members of the police service are still there. And let's go on now to what the former commissioner had to responded by saying on this revelation. Unapologetic Griffith. Gary, I make no apology for providing citizens with the opportunity to protect and defend themselves. I make no apology for providing citizens with that. So said former Police Commissioner Gary Griffith yesterday in response to an exclusive Sunday Express report on the contents of the Stanley John report into allegations of corruption in the issuing of firearm users' licenses. Retired Justice was appointed. We know how he was appointed. We know what he said. We know the conclusion he came to. In a statement yesterday, Griffith, who was critical of the fact that confidential information was able to reach the hands of reporters, and once again wondered if there was a Get Gary campaign. However, he also compared the Stanley John report to the Barrington report, claiming it was almost a carbon copy. Again, Griffith questioned this same thing. And I have made some videos previously drawing this question up. Some of these leaks seem to be kind of always in one direction, and usually to one newspaper, the Daily Express. Well, usually the Sunday Express. And the Express ran these articles over and over and over and over for the last 2 years or so. The Express ever so often would be running a leak and running a leak, and this leaked and this leaked and this leaked, and they regularly frame the leaks and frame the stories to seem like they're pointing towards Gary, while sometimes they may not even have anything to do with Gary. Now, on the media side, you could understand part of it because Gary almost always responds. He makes for good news coverage. You would almost always get a story and a follow-up story and a follow-up on the follow-up story if you write a story about him. So you could understand that perspective. But when you're looking at the entirety of the system, these emails would have to be coming from confidential sources. And what would be the motive of confidential sources to do this? Think about it a bit. If they're leaking in this manner, are they trying to clean up the police service? Because they don't seem to be leaking with intent to get the officers fired. They seem to be leaking with intent to embarrass the former commissioner. And hopefully, I guess, by embarrassing him, it ensures that he cannot run again for commissioner of police. And if you're looking at it, again, very likely these leaks would have to come from the inside. Good night, interesting. Very likely these leaks would have to come from the inside of the police service. And now you'd have to question, why would someone inside of the police service or inside of the national security apparatus want to make the former commissioner look bad, to make sure he cannot get a job, while not doing it in a manner that actually cleans up the service? That's curious to me. And Gary pointed out that this Stanley John report was actually very similar to our previous report, and we actually went through the previous report that was laid, the Barrington report. We know that the Police Service Commission Stanley John inquiry was established in early September 2021. We knew, all right. The Stanley John report, this is Gary Griffith speaking here. The Stanley John report, being drafted by someone with no experience in criminal investigations, is virtually a carbon copy of the Barrington report, with the chain of events being: government handpicks and pays someone to investigate possible criminal offenses. The individual submits a report full of "it is alleged," "it is rumored," and "I have heard." The report is then leaked immediately to the media by government officials who hired them. A third investigative report is also forthcoming, also by selected civilians of the government, which would say and achieve the same objective. The additional humor in this one is that it involves previous retirees of the TTPS who, when in office as serving police officers, never investigated these same allegations, which have existed for decades. Exactly. Corruption in the firearms users' whole process isn't something new. That wasn't something that started with Gary Griffith. So for all of these officers to suddenly seem like they are all so very concerned about just this one area inside of the police service and the corruption that exists there seems highly suspicious to me. Another bit that he said was noted that he said over in the Guardian article to this. He noted, though, Griffith said that whoever leaked the report has now breached the Proceeds of Crime Act and has now tipped off criminal elements of what has been acquired to have them properly investigated by a legitimate law enforcement authority. I found this very interesting too. As Rachel Globman in the chat rightfully pointed out, this isn't a criminal investigation. This isn't done by the police, so no charges can be laid, but all the details of the investigation are now released. So whoever that ACP was, whoever those senior officers were, whoever those first division officers were, whoever those officers were that were asking for the $30,000 bribe, whoever the officers were inside that were asking for the $20,000 bribe, whoever the inspector was that approached the junior officer telling him, I could let you make that $20,000, wink wink, whoever all of these people are now fully informed that all the directions they can be investigated. They know now, very likely they also know who is the witness that can pinpoint them to, because you have in this case, they're telling you basically where they're getting the witness statement from. So similarly, now this could be a bit conspiratorial. I honestly, granted, I could tell you that I could see how this might be a bit conspiratorial. I understand that. But I understand how it could be. Just now, let me make sure that all is running well. Just now, some technical difficulties over. You know, the YouTube is the one usually to give that kind of trouble when it's ready. So just trying to sort that out, and once we have that sorted, we'll get back to the full details of which we speak. Grand. Okay. Yes. Could it be possible that the leak was actually a means of removing the legs for any future investigation? That's literally where I was just going. I find it very interesting and very convenient. So you could kill two birds with this one leak of an investigation stone. You see, you get to drag the former commissioner's name through the mud and paint him as a corrupt individual who is just allowing guns to freely move through our society, while at the same time giving a heads up to all of those inside of the Firearm division that names would have been called in an official investigation. I find that very convenient. And it doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense. I don't understand why the police would do this. Are you familiar with the Special Operations Response Team founded by the former commissioner? No, I am not very familiar with it. I am not sure the Special Operations Response Team was founded by the former commissioner. I feel like SORT was around before that. Or was it spelled a different way before that? I'm not sure. But I feel like they were around a little while before that. I'm not sure. All right. What Mr. Griffith went through to see was that there was actually a rigorous process. Griffith also said these clear, cheap political planned objectives not only blatantly demonstrates a political agenda with no purpose to solve the problem, but also impugns the character of those hired to have submitted these baseless reports and affects the proper investigation by the legitimate law enforcement authority, that being the TTPS, to target perpetrators and allows them to escape via this obviously political motive, as it keeps giving criminal elements the information that has been acquired to bring them to justice. Obviously. So that's obvious. That bit was obvious. And right, it was spelled SORT before. Okay, great. So yes, I was familiar with the SORT before, and then they changed it around to the Special Operations Response Team. No, I am not familiar with it. Familiar with what part of it exactly? I am not familiar with it. I suppose there would be something in particular that you'd be talking about with SORT. I don't know exactly what you're talking about with them. But as I said, it is interesting now that all of this information is in the public domain, and all of these members in the TTPS who are still inside of the TTPS, who are obviously corrupt according to the report, now have all the information on where the investigation has found them out. Griffith said the granting of FULs was a rigorous process with many layers, each requiring special undertaking. And after the completion of all those undertakings by various units, the completed file is then submitted to the Commissioner of Police for signature. Under my watch, the following was publicly undertaken. I openly stated that there was a matter of concern of corruption in firearm issue. The best way to start solving a problem is to admit that there was a problem. It was made easier for law-abiding citizens to acquire firearms, hence affecting the blackmail and bribery being conducted by the few rogue elements in the TTPS using the process of difficulty in acquiring such licenses. This is an interesting point, and tell me what you think in the chat. Tell me using logic. We aren't inside of the process. We were not there in the closed meeting, in the closed door meetings with Gary Griffith. We weren't there in the firearm department. Well, maybe some of us in the chat were. I don't know. I wasn't there. But tell me if this makes sense. If the process to acquire a firearm is harder, wouldn't it make sense that there would be more trickery inside of the firearm users department? While if the process was easier, then would that make it easier for bribes and corruption to pass? Which way would be easier? If less people get the firearm license or more people get it, which way would be easier for corruption to go through? Or which way would be more profitable for corruption? Probably more profitable for corruption is the way I'd use. Because I could see it being a possibility that when the firearm user licenses were much more difficult to acquire, much fewer of them were going out there, I could see it being plausible that in such a time, bribes could have been passing at a higher rate because it was harder to go through. Now, if it's generally easier to go through, you don't need to pay a bribe. It's just generally easier to go through. Corruption is easier to hide in complexity. That's something I regularly see. Corruption is easier to hide in complexity. And when the process was so complex, where you had this to do and this to do, and you had no idea whether you would get the license or not, you didn't even fully know the criteria why a license was revoked. It could just be revoked on a whim. Then there would always be some greasing of the process needed. But if the process was, once you generally had all of these things in line, then you get it. Then there wouldn't necessarily be need for as much greasing of the process. It's always been virtually impossible to acquire FUL through the legal process. Griffith went on to ask this question. I agree with this question. Why not other probes? Is Passport Office corrupted as well? Author Malcolm asking there in the similar tone to the former commissioner. He was asking, why not other probes? I find that to be a very pertinent question. The former police commissioner also questioned why no such special investigators were hired by the government to deal with the decades-old problem of reports of corruption in the driver's permit issue at licensing office, or work permits issued in the Ministry of National Security, or thousands of monthly fraudulent checks at various ministries, and any allocation that is ruled by a person's discretion and not an objective system is flawed. Full on correct, Super Mario. You got turned down by the Passport Office. I wouldn't doubt there's corruption in all of those offices. Good night, unknown boy blessings to you too. Hundreds of buyer licenses to you. Small money problems. Those are really good questions. If you as a government are so concerned about areas where corruption is at really at a boiling point, as Trinidadians, let's speak honestly. Is corruption that we know, is the noted corruption higher in the firearms department or in the licensing department, issuing licenses? I would wager the licensing department. I would think anyone in Trinidad would wager the licensing department. And if the case is that there's corruption there, and you're saying you're hiring investigators, to really get to the bottom of all this corruption, you cannot in good conscience as a government of Trinidad and Tobago allow this corruption to stand. This government is here to stamp out corruption. These guys will not have it. They will not have you doing all this corruption in their country. So they must stamp out corruption. So then, where are the investigators into all of those other areas? I would like a special investigation into the licensing department. I would like a special investigation into customs. I would like a special investigation into those customs guys that are clearing your barrels and taking home people's goods that the auntie send for them. I would like a special investigation into those matters. But no special investigation there. Special investigation into the firearms department. I find that does not make sense. That does not add up. Two things that seems to be pointing at, to me, the two things that seems to be pointing at is one, the obvious part, the former commissioner has clearly made quite a few enemies, and some of them seem to be very clearly gunning for him. And I find maybe a bit of corruption happened in leaking this information, basically giving the police officers who are involved in the corrupt activities a heads up. That somebody needs to investigate why that was done, and I'd like to see some arrests made. Someone needs to tell me that an investigation is being launched into this after this, a criminal investigation. That's one part. And the second part to this is the part that I'm sure many of you don't necessarily agree with me on, the part where I believe it should be allowed for much more law-abiding citizens to have access to firearms. And I think the authorities that be, both in the police service and in the governance structure, do not like that idea. They do not like the idea of more people having access to firearms. While personally, I like that idea. And to some people that said we would be the Wild Wild West, the example I regularly draw. Now, I'm not saying just give everyone in Trinidad and Tobago firearms. I don't think that would necessarily be a good idea. And we're talking about a legal process to get it. We have a process to do it. I'm just saying that the process shouldn't be stymied by outside forces. You allow those who are legally qualified to have them. And the prime example I like to draw is that vehicles, cars, are very dangerous too. And nearly all of your neighbors own a vehicle. And you walk the road with your neighbor driving out of their driveway. And you don't look around expecting that they're going to use this deadly weapon, the thing that can be a deadly weapon, to just take you out. It just doesn't happen. A happy neighbor living in their home isn't generally going to sacrifice their entire life to kill someone just like that. It just doesn't go like that. Humans don't actually function that way. Most of the extremely violent people who want to just go... My ex should be very afraid. Well, with that pronouncement, you cannot qualify for any firearm user licenses. I'm just saying. But the people in our society who are generally the most violent and the most willing to already do violent acts already have access to firearms. The violent people who are willing to kill people on a whim usually already have the firearms. The people who do not want to kill people on a whim, the people who are not generally violent, are the people who do not have the access to firearms that quickly, generally speaking. So I'm not by and large afraid. Of course, they have to do some training. I fully agree with that. You should not have untrained people with firearms out there. These things are deadly tools. Train people before you before you allow them to be licensed to have it. But those two things seem to be the direction this leak seems to be pointing in. One, it seems to be a problem with the former commissioner himself. And two, it seems to be a problem with allowing general members of the society to be armed. And I don't like that idea. I don't find there should be a problem in that. And if our government is so interested in stamping out the corruption, then I find they should launch some of those special investigations into areas in our society where we know for sure that a lot of the corruption is ongoing. Now, part of the reason that I'm pretty sure some of this has to do with Griffith himself being disliked is that nearly any time there's any negative shown, it is nearly always leaked. For example, the letter to the Police Service Commission, and armed society is harder to control, or at least so they would fear. I believe so too. Business owners need to be the majority of civilians with firearms. I think anyone who qualifies should be the majority of people with firearms. Something I always found interesting in the whole bacchanal with the former commissioner. They recently released the letter that the Prime Minister wrote to the former Police Service Commission, talking in great detail about how Gary Griffith disrespected him and why he thought that commissioner shouldn't be allowed another round on the job. Here are some of the problems I have with this, right? Let's go through, just a browse through the history of it. I don't know how many of you remember the incident when several people were found, I believe it was in the Bayside Towers or something like that, and they were not treated to the same kind of treatment that some of the people found in Carnage Bay were treated to when they were breaking some of the lockdown rules. And I think the Prime Minister said a statement out on it. The Prime Minister said a statement where he believes that all members of society should be equal in the law, and the police should enforce the law equally across the board. Basically something to that effect. And when the Prime Minister said that, Gary Griffith took that as impugning negative traits on his treatment in the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and he fumed out for it, and he had a running battle with the Prime Minister for quite some time, saying some very disrespectful things, and the Prime Minister held it in his heart, and eventually he wrote a letter to the former willing to pay to get the FUL illegally. That's also true. The interesting thing is quite a few law-avoiding citizens willing to pay to get the FUL illegally. Before weren't getting through under the former commissioner, I think Griffith had his people who were profiting, and that could have been an issue. Yes, quite a few law-avoiding citizens are willing to pay to get it. But that's my entire point. Laws are not for the lawbreakers. Laws are for the law followers. So if you have a law saying firearms are banned in a country, you are really banning the firearms for the law obeyers. Now, here's the thing. I would have had no problem with no one having firearms in our country if it could have happened. If our police service was so effective that they were successful in ensuring that there were no firearms in the hands of bandits out there, and we were hearing robberies taking place with tree lines and people running up to your door and beating down your door with sledgehammers and construction equipment. Well, okay, in that case, Coast Guard first, yes, correct. But in that case, well, fine. If nobody has the weapon, well, then nobody has the weapon. But if you're telling me our laws say that none of us have weapons, but all the criminals have them, that just does not make sense to me. That does not make sense. Think about it. Think about it in a school environment. For all the people inside of school still in the chat, still in the lives. Think about it in a school environment. Imagine you're in a school and the dean of the school sets some rules for the bullies and for everyone in the school, like England, stabbings galore. England is a prime example of that. The dean in the school sets a rule in the school. There shall be no hitting. No one is allowed to hit anyone ever for any reason. No hitting shall be allowed in any schools. Okay, grand. I like that rule. I'll send my child to that school. Fine. No hitting. But then the first week passes and my child tells me, well, there are some bullies in the school that pass around and just tap them every other day. Every morning, not every day, not every other day. Every morning there's a bully that passes in the class and taps my child and walks off. And nothing is done. The principal keeps saying, well, somebody has to come with evidence for it. And when people come with evidence, they say, well, it's a he say she say thing. Well, nobody knows. Nobody really knows. So, okay. And every day, this bully is tapping my child. And then, when my child turns around and punches the bully square in their nose, you tell my child, no hitting, and you give them detention. Or you suspend them, send them home. Then the rule doesn't make sense. You're not actually protecting anyone except the bully. If you cannot enforce the rule against the criminal element, then why are you enforcing the rule that could help protect the innocent only on the innocent? That does not add up to me. It really does not. That's just the way I see it. If you cannot stop the bullies from tapping up the innocent children, then you tell the innocent children, here's what. We're going to teach you taekwondo, we're going to teach you some jujitsu, and the next time this guy taps you, break his nose. Doesn't that actually seem like a more fair system than telling them, no, you can't hit back, but keep allowing the bullies to keep tapping them? I do not understand this. It's beyond me. I understand the danger of firearms, and firearms are a scary thing. I fully understand that. Firearms are scary. Very. Especially the fact that you literally just basically point and say, okay, pop. You just point and say, okay, that person, and that person can be dead. That's a remarkable amount of power to have in the hands of fickle humans. I fully understand that. And I understand the viewpoint where the viewpoint comes from, where many people think it's best in our society if no one has these weapons. Our society would be best if just no one has it. Perfectly understood. But we live in reality. And in our society, it seems impossible for them to actually reach to a point where nobody has it. And I find it, as I said, wow. Hold a moment. My Instagram live has just cut for whatever purpose. Just a moment, I'll be right back. I'll be right back, just organizing this live again. Oh my. The difficulties with the live persist. Okay. TTPS coming for your live by too much facts. Well, it could be. I think TTPS have some new equipment. They say could do some online stuff here. So you never know. You never really know. Okay, I'm back on the live again. Good. We're back Instagram. We're back on Instagram live. We're back live over on YouTube. Are we? Are we okay with this live over on YouTube now? Are we okay? Are we okay? Yeah, we are back live over on YouTube. Grand. The metaverse sounding kind of good now. TTPS coming for your life. If police shooting police for woman, imagine if everyone had a gun. That is a good point. What went wrong, Author Malcolm? I honestly don't know, bro. It's just sometimes Instagram feels to be Instagramish. That's a good point. And that's the point where I think Trinidad could fall into some problems. It seems in Trinidad culture, there are way too many men who reach the point where they seem willing to end it all. And you see that kind of You see that kind of love triangle business that many Trinidadians love to live in? That would not work out well with guns all around our society. Those love triangles need to turn into love lines. One straight line. You know, one at this point and one at this point. Forget that extra point in the triangle. The triangle is the triangle is where the problems are really caused. I don't get what the point is in being a law-abiding citizen when we are the mistreated ones. That's the thing about keeping a country running. The important thing with keeping a country functional is keeping people believing in the fact that if we remain law-abiding citizens, that there is a benefit to it. If people don't believe that anymore, then you have a recipe for disaster in your country. If people are losing the belief that by obeying the laws, they would allow themselves to stay on the good side. All right. We're going into one more story before we close tonight. One more story. And I thought this was a good story to follow up on. We spoke, the movie Law Abiding Citizen proved the loopholes and crap in the judicial system. Yeah. That's why it was such a hit. It proved something. We spoke previously about some of the difficulties Trinidad and Guyana are going through right now. The Guyanese business community is not very happy with, you should use Loom. I don't know what's Loom, author Malcolm. I'll check it out. The Guyanese business community and our Trinidadian local business community seem to be having a bit of friction. I could estimate at least 1 in 5 Trinis have broken the law. I'm pretty sure way more than 1 in 5 Trinis have broken the law. We have so many laws that basically probably every Trini has broken a law at some point in time, very likely. Yes, solo. Ooh. We are nearly everyone. I will go with nearly everyone has broken the law. Probably a newborn baby with the exception. If you cussed in public, all of you cuss buds, if you cussed in public, you broke a law. Whining down. If you're doing a rude, suggestive, gyrating dance in public, you're breaking the law. If you're singing a rude, suggestive song aloud in public, you're breaking the law. So, a really large majority of Trinidad and Tobago have broken our law. But yes, we're talking, well, that is 100% lawless. We're talking the relationship between Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago. The relationship has always had some friction, but the relationship between our business communities took a little bit of an extra hit recently when some of the Guyanese business community took it personal when some in the Trinidad business community seemed to be questioning a law that Guyana was looking to pass. A law, well, not they were looking to pass, that they did pass in order to help protect their own local businesses. Some in the Trini business community had some problems with that law, and they voiced the concern in an email, and that email, wow, and that email ended up getting leaked. When the email got leaked, the Guyanese community was not happy with it. They were not happy at all. And let's see where this has led us now. Now is a great opportunity for healing. Warner on tiff between Guyana and TNT business community. A leading regional executive who has been embroiled in the ongoing tiff between the business communities in Guyana and TNT believes the situation, while it is unfortunate, provides a good opportunity to address all outstanding differences between the two countries. On January 11th, Gervais Warner, the chairman of the CARICOM private sector organization, issued a routine internal communication following an executive meeting where, among other things, Guyana's new local content law was discussed. The email, however, included an email signature block with Warner's substantive position as president and group CEO of regional conglomerate Massy, as well as the address of its headquarters in Port of Spain. So, just a quick rundown of what went on before, for those who may not be up to date on it, is this business organization, the CARICOM private sector organization, they are a combination, they are a conglomerate of various businesses and business groups in different Caribbean territories. And what they do now is they communicate with those various business groups in the different territories to allow for some cooperation, to allow for things to happen more smoothly and business to be done in between the territories. Now, Guyana has recently passed a law with their up-and-coming oil sector that makes sure that certain parts in the oil sector hires locally. There are certain areas inside of the oil sector that now must have a certain percentage of their business from either local companies or local persons. They must hire local persons to do it. And it's not that unfair. If you look at the sections they're choosing to do this with, the sections are were typically more of the low skill section. They were asking people like cleaners, they were asking security. They were saying, for example, if you're looking to rent buildings, if you're looking to have apartments to rent, if you have to rent quarters for your employees, you have to rent from local companies. And that makes sense. You don't want it that the international people come into your country, and because you now have an oil boom, they take all of those resources from your country and move out with it. You don't want that. So this would have helped. This is what they did to help protect from that. But the Caribbean business community had some problems with that, because according to the CARICOM rules, you're supposed to have some free trade in between the Caribbean. If you're from Trinidad, you're supposed to be able to go over to Guyana without any great set of tariffs and taxes and be able to do business freely. So they had some problems with it, and they raised those problems, and in the email they spoke about those problems. Now, the Guyanese obviously were upset about this, especially seeing as the email was signed by the president of Massy. And in case you didn't know, Massy is right up there with owning nearly everything in the Caribbean. Well, not in the Caribbean, but it seems like a fight up between Massy and Ansa McCall for owning just about everything out there. So if you're a Guyanese business person, and your government passed something to make sure that some of your smaller entrepreneurs could reap some of the benefits of your newfound wealth, you obviously would take it kind of personally if it seems like one of the largest companies in the Caribbean seem like they have a problem with that and they don't want you to have that protection. And the Guyanese community did take it personally. Now, however, Mr. Warner himself is saying this is the prime opportunity to really deal with some of these underlying issues. Warner was yesterday asked during an interview with Guardian Media's lead editor for business why he thought the situation arose. Warner said it was interesting to see the response to the leaked email and said it cannot be ignored. Honestly, I think it's a big opportunity. It is kind of interesting how this became so acrimonious so quickly, Warner said. Warner said with the issues now brought to the surface provided an opportunity to correct them. There is something that we see that is the energy between us. And all that happened is that this happened to lance that boil. I don't believe you can ever address any issue until it is on the table. He said the two business communities can come together to address their differences. I am happy the issue is on the table, because the response, you can't step over it. You can't not notice it, and so I believe that this is a really great opportunity for us to do some healing between TNT and Guyana. TNT business and Guyanese business, he said. Warner said there's a lot of history between the neighboring countries and we need to find ways to work better together. This did not happen last week. This is decades, scores of years of stuff building up over time, Warner said. That had nothing to do with that leaked email. That has everything to do with the history of how Guyanese feel they have been treated by TNT and TNT business. And quite frankly, I think this is a great opportunity for us to listen to them and for us to be part of a healing conversation, he said. And he's right. He's right. I was supposed to ask you this question since we are talking on labor. Does Trinidad have laws to prevent big monopolies? Big monopolies in what way? I'm not sure about what they call those. I'm not sure about our antitrust laws. I'm not sure how that functions, but by and large, Trinidad's government, Trinidad's state, has a lot of power. And the amount of power that our state generally has, it usually means that our state almost always has the power to cripple a monopoly if they so see fit. Most of the monopolies in Trinidad and Tobago are either run by the state or helped by the state. For example, TCL. TCL has a monopoly now because of the state. Bear that in mind. But yes, these issues between Trinidad and Guyana are not new. They have been under the surface for some time now, and the reason this entire thing blew up so quickly was because those issues were already there. So Mr. Gervais Warner from Massey is correct, I believe. But let's delve into exactly what some of these issues are. What is the reason that Guyana seems to have some of these issues with Trinidad? Guyana's unreciprocated love. An article in The Guardian. The article starts off with a chart showing you the amount of money, the amount of trade, the amount of import by country of origin to Guyana, and the amount of money in US dollars they spent, and the percentage of their import comes from those countries. If you're over on YouTube, you'd be able to see that chart. If you're not, you can pull it up later. You'd still be able to see that chart over on YouTube. And it shows the highest percentage of import to Guyana for the year 2021 at 24.8% came from Trinidad and Tobago. At the price of 242.8 US dollars. 484,000 US dollars. 24% of the Guyanese import comes from the Trinidad and Tobago market. That's 1/4. So let's get into this story and see why Guyana has these problems with Trinidad and Tobago. All it took was a misplaced signature block and a leaked piece of correspondence last week to reveal some deep-seated feelings held by businessmen in Guyana about this country. We knew how this formed. We knew what caused it. We're not going to go back through that. This led to some strong sentiments. President of the Georgetown Chamber of Industry and Commerce, Timothy Tucker, said while the inclusion of Warner's email signature block was unfortunate, they were reliably informed that TNT businessmen were in fact the ones who were the most vocal about objections to the Guyana local content law. So let's start up with that. It's not just that the signature of the Massey boss was on the email questioning Guyana's law. It's that they were reliably informed also that it was majority Trinidad businessmen that raised questions on the issue in the first place. And I don't find that hard to believe. I actually believe that. And I could understand why it would be actually Trinidad businessmen who raised those questions primarily, because Trinidad businessmen would very likely be the ones that would be most in line to benefit from the oil industry. A lot of Trinidad businessmen would already have companies that cater for the downstream oil industry, and they would have already been wetting their chops looking to head over to Guyana and make some of that newfound oil money. So some of that some of the cutting in those policies would obviously most directly affect Trinidad businessmen, and they were the ones most to complain, so obviously they were the ones who drew the most ire from the Guyanese business community. While the questioning of Guyana's local content was contentious enough by itself, what caused the matter to become even more upsetting to some in Guyana was the fact that Warner's substantive title was that of head of the Massey Group. This led to some strong sentiments expressed. President of the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce, right, Tucker said they felt like a betrayal, especially as some TNT-owned businesses have been operating in Guyana for so long that in the psyche of the Guyanese people, they are thought to be local companies. They are part of our society, our culture, our friends and family work with them. So it is very unfortunate that we have gone this route, and that is why I think the uproar, he said. It is unfortunate that Mr. Warner had to be filling two cups, and of course, from a person in the private sector, it is an unfortunate thing that the company he works for has to be mixed up with the organization that circulated the email that was leaked. There are many Guyanese and Trinidadians that are in joint ventures and partnerships, and a lot of Trinidadians would have invested here in Guyana. It becomes a very contentious thing now that we have this kind of rift and animosity, and it is growing, and I want to say from my perspective that it is not anything against the Trinidadian people, Tucker said. He said it arises out of issues with the policies of the TNT government and now the actions of some members in the private sector. It is nothing about the people. I have a lot of close and good Trinidadian friends, some living here and some living there, and I have a good working relationship with them. The Guyana Chamber has a large number of Trinidadian companies in its membership, including Ansa McCall and Massey. So it is nothing personal, but what we are calling for is free trade and the acceptance that we each have to empower and enrich our people first. It is always country first, and then regional second, and then international third. It is three tiers to our development, he said. I agree with that. That makes sense. I have no argument with that. That fully makes sense. The government of a country should be seeing about the nation first, that particular country, the people who voted for you and elected you. Those are the people who are of primary interest to you, then the region, and then the international community. That's why I don't really like the globalism too much, because globalism leans kind of primarily into an international community. And personally, I feel international is too broad to really be a community. Y'all guys ain't really my community. My community is people I can relate with, people that are in reciprocal relationships with me. If you aren't in such a relationship, it's kind of difficult for you to be part of my community and us to be working together for the same common goals. That rarely ever works out. And it usually benefits those richer. So some of that international community stuff, I'm suspicious of. Is YouTube done? No, I don't believe YouTube is done. I believe my YouTube is still up. I'm seeing it right here. Unless there's something that I don't know. The YouTube is still up and running, as far as I can tell. All right. Here's where he went into some more specifics. The recently passed Guyana Local Content Law lays out 40 different services that oil and gas companies and their subcontractors must procure from Guyanese companies by the end of 2022. Guyana is now in the very embryonic stage of the oil and gas discovery. The Guyanese private sector has pushed to make sure we are not spectators to our natural resource development and that we are participants. And it is just in a very small way we are participants, because it is only 40 service areas that have been ring-fenced, and the majority, I would say over 80% of the industry, is still wide open for other players, he said. Fully understood, as I said. Fully understood. You do not want to be a spectator in your own country's resources. Your own country's gained some of these resources. They're the blessing of your own country. You'd like it to trickle down to the members inside of your country. One of the issues that Tucker said has been a sore point between TNT and Guyana is the large disparity in trade between the neighboring countries. According to the Bureau of Statistics of Guyana, the majority of the country's imports come from TNT. Guyana imported 484 million in goods and services from TNT between January to September last year. That accounted for almost a quarter of Guyana's imports for the period. Conversely, TNT was not even listed among the top 10 countries that Guyana exported to for the period. So, we are exporting lots of resources to Guyana, but we aren't importing that many from Guyana. And why is that? There's a massive trade deficit, and it is not just because TNT has the largest manufacturing industry in CARICOM, but because there are a number of non-tariff barriers that do not allow Guyanese manufacturing, and of course Guyanese farmers to export freely to TNT. He is saying that in this case, the assumption would nearly automatically here be that, of course, there's a trade deficit. Trinidad will export more to Guyana and import less from Guyana because we are the largest manufacturer in the Caribbean. Does they have crime like Trinidad? But is Guyana a safe country? Guyana is much safer than Trinidad comparably. We'd say that we are the largest manufacturer in the Caribbean, so obviously there's a trade deficit there. But what the Guyanese Business Chamber is saying is that the trade deficit is not the reason. Non-tariff barriers. Non-tariff barriers meaning they haven't put a tariff on the goods. Tariff meaning basically a tax. It's not like they have a tax on the goods saying we tax Guyanese goods that are being imported. No, it's not a tax. There are other barriers beside taxes, beside the tariff, that are stopping these. Tucker said these non-tariff barriers have affected the export of honey, plantains, pineapples, peppers, and ground provisions. He said at one point the GCCI had a beekeeping project in which 40 people in Guyana were trained in agriculture, but export they cannot. Why? Because our major transshipment hub, Trinidad, has a law on their books since 1935 that prohibits honey that isn't from Trinidad from coming within close proximity of their shores, he stated. We have laws prohibiting foreign honey from entering our shores. So Guyana can't even use us as a transshipment point for our honey. They can't even ship to Trinidad to ship to other places because of our non-tariff barrier. That's a non-tariff barrier. We don't allow foreign honey to enter. Tucker said the GCCI's objections have been long, far, and numerous. The point of this message is something as small as Guyanese honey has been blocked from being exported, not just to Trinidad, but to any country that Guyana have to use Trinidad as a transshipment to get to, he stated. I could understand the anger in that, because it's not only closing the Trinidad market to honey, and I'm sure the Trinidad market would have been very receptive to honey. Now, if you would have used some of the Trinidadian shippers to try and ship outside of Trinidad, they're in trouble. Tucker said that years ago a shipment of honey that was being transshipped by La Pacan, that's a Trinidad shipment place, was seized and destroyed, and La Pacan was fined US $5,000. So obviously Trinidad seems to be very serious about that kind of honey ban, locking Guyanese honey inside of Guyana. Some of the requirements are to de-stem pineapples and pepper, and of course when we de-stem certain produce, their shelf life drops extremely fast, sometimes within 2 days, he said. Now, this isn't the first time I've actually heard about this. I had a conversation with the CEO of the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association a while ago, and I made a video on it where he was speaking about some of the limitations to Trinidad and Tobago manufacturing. And one of the chief limitations to Trinidad and Tobago manufacturing is the fact that we don't have enough land space for some of the raw material that we want. But you know where does have enough land space? Guyana. But unfortunately, we have quite a few barriers prohibiting some of our local manufacturers who want to import from Guyana. So to be fair to our local private sector, their argument isn't even, the argument with Guyana isn't even between the private sectors, and the Guyanese businessman did in fact say that. Some of the argument is with the TNT government policies. The Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturing Association, the manufacturing sector, would love if they could have free open access to the vast expanse of raw materials over in Guyana. That would decrease the price of a lot of our production. But for some reason, a lot of those barriers still remain. He said there's also the problem of the requirement that items must be fumigated with methyl bromide before entry into TNT. Methyl bromide is an ozone depleting substance that both Guyana and TNT and many other countries around the world would have signed on to the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer to phase out. So, requiring Guyana to fumigate its produce with it before entering the country is another non-tariff barrier, knowing that we both signed that protocol when there are plenty other fumigants that can be used, he said. I don't even understand that one. I would really like to interview some of the people and just ask some questions. Some of the people responsible for some of these things, like the Trade and Industry Minister. I know she may have her mind a bit filled with the fact that her offspring is currently facing some pressure for his floating restaurant, but I'd like possibly to ask her some questions. Why do we have these non-tariff barriers still existent? Why do we require people to spray? Ministers don't have answers on these things. So if they don't have answers for this, who would? The ministers are the people who create the policies, not so? Or at least the people who are supposed to be creating the policies. This is why I kind of understand. Like, I've seen some people say where they believe all laws should have a sunset clause. So any law that you establish, any policy that you establish has a sunset clause where it's going to expire in X amount of years, so that you'd have to go back and actually redo that law to make sure it stays there. Because why do we have that law from 1935? That should be something that should be checked into again. These laws shouldn't still be on the books. If they're inhibiting business, if the present world we are living in is much smaller, we in Trinidad and Tobago, we may be heading for a much more focused manufacturing sector. Maybe our cassava flour and our Edo's flour that we have been speaking about, the Dasheen flour, maybe it would be much more viable if we could use some of the cassava locally, but we could also import the majority of it from Guyana, because Guyana has quite a lot of land. Have you ever, I don't know, well, it's not pulled up in this map. If you could see one of those Caribbean maps, look at the size difference between Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago. Guyana has agricultural land. Let's use it. That's the purpose of CARICOM. That was the purpose that we did this. And the state, as the statement goes, the rising tide raises all ships. So if we can import from Guyana, we would benefit the Guyanese farmers. They would be making some money, but we'd also benefit the Trinidad and Tobago manufacturers. They would be able to import their raw materials for a cheaper price. That's the way I see it, at least. Tucker said, apart from these, there are also issues of sanitation and labeling. As fast as the Guyanese manufacturing sector reaches one standard, it is changed and there is another standard being applied, he said. I heard that also. That many of the standards to import things into Trinidad are so onerous, they're so difficult to reach, that many of the Guyanese farmers can't even attain those standards. And sometimes the standards seem more like just purposefully to create the barrier than to ensure safety of some one of these goods. The standards seem like they're just there purposefully creating that barrier for people. I understand the Guyanese difficulty. And if I was Guyanese, I would be angry with Trinidad too. It really does seem like this relationship is a one-way street, and it seems like they intend it to be that way, at least the Trinidad government. All right, so that's all I have for now over on YouTube and over on Instagram. I will bid you goodbye, and I hope you were entertained, informed, or educated, and I'll see you again tomorrow for the next Mindful Live at 9 p.m. And do tune in then. Peace out. Enjoy.